welcome back. And in this demo we are going to create once again copy data pipeline. If you're following this course, in the last lesson we created a copy data pipeline using this wizard. However, in this demo we will go into the author page and we will manually create a pipeline. So everything is going to be same except that in the previous lesson we used this wizard, and in this lesson I want to quickly show you how to create pipeline in the author page, and it should be pretty quick because by now we know all the properties, so I'm not going to explain once again. If you have not listened to the previous lesson, I would encourage you to do so because I want to be very quick here and not re-explain the same thing which I did in the previous lesson. So I will click here and I will create a new pipeline, and this is going to be once again the copy data pipeline. So I can say copy data, and then you can give a description and other information if required. All right, and then in this copy data pipeline we want to create a copy data activity. All right, so this is copy data activity, and you can name it here copy activity, and then you can provide the description. And then we have already discussed about all these settings except below two settings, secure output and secure input, which I will explain after the demo because it will be easy to explain. And then we will create a source here, and in the source we have to create a data set. So I already have actually data set. If you remember, we created this source data set, but let me create a new here. And then if you remember, our source is on blob storage, so I will select the blob storage here, and we have a delimited text file, CSV file. So I will click on continue, and then I can use this linked service which we created in previous lesson, Azure Blob Storage, and then we can choose the file here which is inside this ADF input folder. We have the file product, so let me choose this file here. So this is our input, and we don't need to change anything else, and all these settings we have already discussed before. So first row is a header, so I think I should check it here. And import schema, we will be importing from file directly. We have option to import schema from separate file if required. Sometimes you have a JSON file or some other format file in some other format where it is difficult to identify by data factory what exactly schema is. So in that case you can have a separate file with the schema, and you can upload that file so that data factory can figure out what exactly is the schema of input source. So it looks good, and I will click on OK here. All right, so file path type is the data set, and again we can filter the files here, and we have discussed all these settings in the previous lesson, so I'm not going to discuss this once again here. Everything looks good here, and then we'll go to the sync, and here we will configure the destination, which is going to be SQL Server. So I will search here SQL Server, continue. And we already have linked service for SQL Server. Otherwise you can create the new here, and which is going to be exactly same what we did in the last lesson. So I will just select the existing linked service here, and the table name, we already have table name inside this linked service, the destination. So product is our table name, and once again we are going to import schema from connection store, and we do not have any other important setting here. So let me click OK. So we have our sync data set created here, and here you see we have option to create a new table if required. So in our destination we already have table. If not, then you have option to auto create table in the destination. And then we have pre-copy script. We already discussed that in the previous lesson, and everything else looks good here. We have already discussed this all these settings in previous lesson. So let's go to the mapping, and let me actually collapse this so we get a little bit more space here to discuss. Now it's look good. Now it looks good. So in the mapping we can have import schema here, and then it will import the source and the destination, and it will map all the columns by default. So Data Factory does pretty good job here by mapping all the source and destination columns. So this looks good. If you want, we can have option here to see the source data. You can just take a look if everything is what you are expecting it to be. So go to the next, and that is setting. Now we already discussed the data integration unit and the parallelism fault tolerance. Enable setting, it's exactly same what we did during the copy data wizard, so I'm not going to explain this once again. So let me move forward to the user property, and once again user property is very important setting here. Let me auto generate it. If you want, you can do it. You can add some name and value, and these values we can see at the time of monitoring our pipeline. I'm going to show you that during monitor. It will be more easy to understand when I will show it, but right now just remember that in user property we auto generated these values right now, which is source and the destination. All right, so everything looks good in our pipeline. One second. All right, so let me validate this and see if everything is okay with this pipeline. And your pipeline has been validated, everything looks good. So I will just go ahead and trigger this pipeline now. All right, we have not published it. Sorry, I forgot that. So once we create a pipeline, we validate it, we want to make sure that we deploy this into the live server. So we publish this pipeline. By publishing, we are making sure that this goes to the server and this is accessible to run from Data Factory. And it is going to publish maybe in just few seconds, and it is done. And now we can go ahead and trigger this pipeline here, and we do not have any parameter. In the upcoming lessons we are going to discuss what are parameters, but right now you can just click on OK, and this should run our pipeline. And now we can actually go into the monitor tab and see how our pipeline is doing. So let me duplicate this tab and open the monitor section to look at this pipeline. So I will go into the monitor, and all right, it seems like our pipeline failed once again. So let's look at the error and see that what's going on here. And it says that cannot insert the duplicate key value. Okay, so in the last demo we populate this table, if you remember, and we already have rows here. And in this product ID is primary key, and we are trying to insert the same data again within this table, and that's why our pipeline is failing. So let me truncate this table. Truncate table dbo.product, and so let me truncate this. Sorry, once again. And all right, so now we have 0 rows here. Let me just double check this. So table is empty right now, and once again I want to run this pipeline. So this is the activity which failed, so I can just rerun this activity, and let's see what happened. Now this time this should complete successfully, and let me refresh this, and it's completed. All right, now I can go ahead once again into our destination table and look at this table, and we have data once again. So so I was pretty quick at this time. I did not explain all these properties because we already discussed that in the previous demo. I would highly encourage you to look at the previous demo of copy activity when we use the wizard to create this activity, because I explained all of these properties in that demo. All right, so by now I hope you are getting more and more familiar with this Data Factory page if you're following this course in sequence. So we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back. And in the last lesson we created this copy activity pipeline in which we copy data from blob to the SQL Server destination. Now in this lesson I want to show you some of very important properties, and one of the property is secure output and secure input. So if you look at the monitoring section for this pipeline, so let me open this into another tab, and if I go into the monitor here and if I click on pipeline, I can see all my pipelines here, And the last pipeline, if I open here, I have this one activity which is copy activity, and I can see input and output here. So if I click on input, I can see the metadata related to my input and all the settings and the columns and the type of columns and all those informations here. Similarly, I can open this output from here and I can see all the metadata related to output here. Now sometimes you are dealing with the secure data and you do not want to log these values here. In that case, we can use this setting and we can check this box here that my input and my output data is secure and I do not want to log the values of it. So let me show you this. So I have checked this, and if I just publish my changes here, publish. And also, if you remember last time we had this error that we forgot to truncate our table. So we can truncate it once again, our destination table. Or let's do one thing, let's copy this query truncate table, and here in the sync section, if you remember, we have this option here to run the pre-copy script. If you want to run any script at the destination, so we can run that truncate table dbur product. And let me publish these changes once again. All right, so it will take maybe a second. And so we made two changes. We added this truncate table statement here to truncate the destination table so that we can run this same pipeline again and again. And in the general tab, I checked these two boxes here. Now, before I run this pipeline, I want to show you once again that in the monitor section, you can see we have this input data and this output data. So let me run this pipeline now. And this may take a few seconds to run this pipeline. Meanwhile, we can go into the monitoring section. We can click on all pipeline runs, and our pipeline is in progress, and this should complete in a second. It's completed. So let me go inside the pipeline. And now if you see here, the input section is blank here. And the output section is also blank here. So we can use this setting whenever we are dealing with the secure data. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back. And in this lesson, we are going to learn about one of very important property, and that is user property. I can click here and you can see source and destination in case of copy data activity. But this property is available with almost all the activities. So for example, let's say if I go to any activity, for example, let's say if I use the lookup activity, you can see the user property with lookup activity, or maybe any other property. Let's say get metadata activity, you have user property, or delete activity, you have user property. So it is with all the activities. This property exists for all the activities. So right now we are working with copy data activity, and in context of copy data activity, the two properties, source and destination, make sense, and you can auto generate these properties. So for example, if I delete this right here, and you can just click on auto generate, and this will generate these properties. Now, how this is useful? So if I go to my monitor section here, and I am inside the monitor, if I click on monitor and pipeline, I can see all my pipelines. And if I open my previous pipeline, I only have one activity. And if I go right here, I have this user property. And if I click here, I can see both source and destination. Now, this looks simple, but this is very helpful, because without this user property, I do not have any other way to figure out what exactly is my source, location of the source, the path of the source, or the destination table. Because if you look at the other sections of monitor, I have input metadata, but this metadata does not tell me exactly what is the path of my source. Similarly, we have the output here, and similarly we have the details. Even within details, I don't think we have any information about the source and destination. We have the information about connector, that our source is like blob storage, but exactly what is the path, that I cannot find here. Similarly, what exactly is the destination table? I cannot find this information here. So in those cases, this user property you can directly see right here, and this source and destination is also here because of this user property. And in fact, if you want, you can add other user properties also. So for example, if I go back to my data factory pipeline here, I can add another property here. Let's say I can say user Ishant, and I can publish this pipeline, and this will save all the changes. And once again, I can run this pipeline, and at that time, if we will see in the monitor section, we will see this user property also. So let me run this pipeline. This has published successfully. So let me run this pipeline, and it is running. So let me go back to my monitor section here, and in all pipelines, this is the pipeline which is in progress right now, and this should complete in a second. This is completed. Let me go back to the property, the pipeline here, and on the right hand side, if I open here, I can see the user Ishant. Similarly, you can add more properties or parameters here, and you can look at the values of those parameters and property during the monitor section, and it is very helpful. So thank you. That's it. This is I just want to explain this user property in this lesson. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back. And in this lesson, we are going to discuss about the parameters, passing parameters to data factory. So what are parameters? So let's discuss a scenario. If you're following this course, in the previous lessons, we created this pipeline, copy activity, in which we are copying data from blob storage to SQL Server, Azure SQL Server. Now, this pipeline we created for product.csv file. Now let's say I also want to move product category.csv file. How I'm going to do that? Should I create another pipeline maybe, or maybe another activity here for another file? And what about if I have hundreds of files here? Am I supposed to create hundreds of pipelines? And what about not just hundreds of files? Let's say I have hundreds of containers. And what about hundreds of different blob storage account, different storage account in itself? And what about if we have, hundreds of tables name? What about hundreds of database? What about hundreds of servers? So for each scenario, for each situation, am I going to create a separate activity here, or maybe separate pipeline? And what about if these server names or database name or table names or the storage account or containers or this file keep changing? What about the name changes? Am I going to change my pipeline again and again? So to handle these kind of situations, we use the parameters. So parameters are simply input values which we provide to our pipeline at the runtime dynamically. So basically, we can provide all these different names like storage account name, or the container name, or the file name, or the destination server name, database name, table name. All these different values we can provide to the pipeline dynamically at the runtime. And whatever values we will provide, pipeline will run for those values. In that case, this one simple pipeline with one activity can work for any scenario, any data source, any data destination, and this will work. I'm sorry about that, not any data source. Actually, still parameter does not work with all types of storage. But my point is, parameters is used to dynamically configure these values. Now let's see how we do that. So in this copy activity, we have a source, and we have a data set named delimited text1. So if we go into the data set, we have delimited text1. So let's open this. And here you can see that we have hard coded these values like link service name and the file path and the file name. So let's say if I want to change this file name, and I can dynamically provide this file name here. For that, first I have to create the parameter. So let's go into the parameter and create a new parameter. So I can say that input or maybe just input file here. Okay, and I can put some default value here. So at the runtime, if I do not provide any value, it will take this default value. And go back to the connection here. Now in this file name, you see I have this option here, add dynamic content. So I will click here, and here I will create an expression to get the value from the parameter. And if you see, just close this, we have this parameter section here, and inside we can see the parameter we just created. So I can select this, and you can see it created an expression which is going to convert into a value later, and this is the basically value of parameter. So I will just finish this, and you can see that we have dataset.input file, and this is the parameter value which is going to pass in the file path. Now let's go back to the pipeline here once again, and if you see here in the source, now we can see this dataset properties input file, and we can see the value here, right? So now let's do the same thing for the sink. If I go to the sink and I can see the dataset here, I do not see the value, which I can provide at the runtime. So let's look at this dataset, Azure SQL table 1. So let's go to this dataset here, and once again I can see my table name here. So if I click on edit, it will allow me to edit this table name. So let's click on edit here, and I can now add dynamic content here. But before that, let's create a parameter which I'm going to pass here. So I may say here output table, let's say output table name, which is going to be of string type. So now if I go back to the connection here, and if I click on add dynamic content, once again under parameter I can see this parameter value which is converted into an expression, dataset.output table, and this is going to be converted to an output table or whatever value I'm going to pass to this parameter. So let me finish this, and my dataset has now this dynamic value which is going to figure out at the runtime the value of the table, the name of the table. So let me go back to my pipeline once again, and here you can see now we have this dataset properties output value, and we are going to pass some value here. Now we can see that in the source we have this input file, and in the sink we have this input file, and we don't need a mapping because mapping is going to be defined at the runtime, because now we are not working only with the product table. We can pass any input table name and output table name, input file name and output table name. So let me clear this. So now I do not have any mapping here. Now the last thing I have to do is I need to go to the pipeline here. If I click on the blank space, I can see pipeline related parameters and different configurations here. So let me create parameter at the pipeline level. So new and input file at pipeline, let's say, and I will create one more parameter at the pipeline level, and I would say it as a output file, output table pipeline here. Okay, now we have these parameters at the pipeline level. So when we will run the pipeline will ask us to pass values of these parameters. Now we need to pass the values of these parameters to our dataset. So once again, go back to the copy data activity, go back to the source, and now when I click here input file, again I have option to choose a dynamic content here, and if I close this, within the pipeline I have option for input file name. So I can select this from here. Same thing, let's go to the sink and click here on the output table, add dynamic content, and I will add output table pipeline, and you can see here pipeline.parameters, so parameters within pipeline and whatever value we will provide for output table pipeline. So let's finish this here. All right, so let's look at our properties once again. So in general everything looks good. In source we have changed the dataset and we have not changed anything else. In destination, again, we have changed the data set and everything looks good. We have removed the mapping, so that's good. In setting, we have not changed anything. Everything is default. And in user property, we can remove this because this is now not reflecting the right values because these values are going to be whatever we pass at the runtime. So we can, select all of this and delete. We don't need this. So everything looks good here. And I will validate my pipeline and it should be good. So let me publish my changes. So I have made changes to the pipeline and 2 of the data set, which is good. So let me publish it, and it may take a second to publish all my changes, and it is completed successfully. Now I'm going to run this pipeline. So trigger now, and you see that now when I run, it is asking for parameter values for input file name and output file. So let me do it first for product only. Let's see if it works fine. Then we'll run for product category also. So product.csv is my input file name. I just want to make sure I do not make any typo here. So let me just copy paste it. All right, so my input file name is product.csv and my output table name is product. And let me click on OK, and it will run the pipeline. Now, if I go back to my monitor section here, and if I just refresh it, I should be able to see that my pipeline, and this is completed successfully. You can see the parameters here. And if I click here, my input parameter was product.csv and my output table was product. So if I go back to my SQL server, I should see values in my product table, and this is good. Now the fun part will come if we can run the same pipeline for some other table. So once again, run this pipeline, and now this time we will pass another value here. This time we will pass the product category. So let me copy and paste here the name. Again, I don't want any typos, so I will just paste it from the source. So right now my source file is product category.csv under the blob storage, and my destination is product category table in the same database, and both this file and the destination have the same structure, and we want to make sure that we have the same structure. If you look at this input file here, here, if we go to the edit, I can see I have 3 columns here: product category ID, parent product category ID, and name. And if we look at the destination table here, if I do the select star from this table, I should be able to see 3 columns here. If we go to the result, I can see I have 3 columns here. So everything looks good. So I have provided product category.csv as an input and product category table name as an output. So let me click on OK here, and hopefully it should complete successfully. So let me go back to the monitor here and again refresh this, and I should see another pipeline which is completed successfully here. And this time if I look at the parameters were the product category.csv and product category as a final destination table name. So let me go back to the SQL server and run this query again, and this time we have data inside the product category table. Now in this demo, we were passing the values of source, file name, and destination table name into parameter. But actually you can pass not just a table and the file name, but you can also pass the server name, the database name, and all of other values also. So let's see that how. So let's go back to the, for example, the SQL table dataset, which we this is the destination which we just edited and passed the parameter. Now if I go to the link service here, and if I open the link service here, this is my existing link service. But if you see here, this is my server name, and you can see here add dynamic content. So server name I can pass dynamically. Similarly, the database name I can pass dynamically. So I can once again I can create a parameter here. So just to show you an example, let's say if I say server name here, and let me add another one as a database name. All right, so we have two parameters here. Now if I go here and I say add dynamic content, I can pass the server name here. And similarly, if I go to the database name, I can pass the database name here. And you can see linked service dot database name. And so we can add the password here, we can add the username here. So wherever you see this add dynamic content, you can pass parameters there. And once again, we will link these parameter value with the pipeline parameter. So now we will create the same parameters at the pipeline level, server name and database name, and we will link those parameters with these parameters here. And when we run the pipeline, we can provide the name of the destination server, destination database, in fact the user ID and password. So all these informations we can provide dynamically at the runtime. So you can see, let me cancel this. So you can see that now we do not have to create a separate pipeline or separate activity, and using the same pipeline now with the simple one activity, I can practically copy data from any source to any destination. Excuse me for my last comment. Actually, we cannot copy from any source to any source. This is a very recent feature, and at the time of recording, this is still not available with all the data stores. So if I go to the delimited text here, I can edit the file name, but if I open the linked service here, I cannot edit, for example, the storage account name or storage key or other information here. So if I Google here, and if I go to the data factory parameterization, and if I open this link, let me go to the parameterization here, and you can see right now, again at the time of recording, only these data stores support the parameterization. But this list is changing very fast. So very soon, I hope Azure will add all the remaining data source connectors in this list. But anyway, I hope the point is clear. The concept is clear. What is parameterization and why we use parameterization, so that we can dynamically pass values at the runtime, and we can use those values to dynamically change the file name and other properties of source and the destination. Or in fact, later we will see we can use parameterization in the data flow transformation also. So that's it for this lesson. I hope now you have a better understanding of parameterization. Thank you. Factory portal, and if I go to pipeline here, I have this data flow. Let me add another data flow. So when I add data flow, I try to add data flow and I want to create a new data flow. It asks me which kind of data flow I want, mapping data flow or wrangling data flow. So what is the difference between these two? So first of all, both of these data flow is used to visually transform your data without writing any code. That's very simple. It's just interface. You do drag and drop, maybe changing few configurations, and then just using those that interface, you can transform your data. Now mapping data flow is more focused on the flow part, flow of the data. You can quickly identify the sources or the transformation, or you can do the branches or joins and the sink or the destination. So basically it transforms the data and schema. Basically it's more focused on the schema part or the flow, overall flow of your data. And wrangling data flow is more focused on the data part. You can quickly see what is the final data set will look like. Actually, it is also true that mapping data flow and wrangling data flow, they both overlap each other in terms of capabilities. There are transformation of data, there are activities you can do in the mapping also and in the wrangling also. But when we talk about, as I said, when we are more focused on the flow, identifying the source and the sink and all that, we generally talk about the mapping. And when we are more focused on the wrangling, the data part, munging the data or cleaning the data, at that time we generally talk about the wrangling data flow. Actually, wrangling data flow behind the scene use the Power Query. It's a Power Query online mashup editor kind of thing. So let's move forward, and I want to here very quickly show you how does the mapping data flow look like. So this is the interface of mapping data flow, in which we have these sources, and then we are doing some kind of transformation. We are joining different tables here, maybe doing some lookup and renaming and creating and updating columns and all that. And finally, we are syncing that data into our final destination table. And all these different transformations are of different types. So let me show you that. So we can, at the high level, we can divide into 3 categories. We can have the as I said, we can have multiple inputs, multiple sources. So you may have a need to join those sources. So you have join or the union or lookup, conditional split, all these kind of activities. And then you may have a need to modify the schema. You may want to add another column, derived column, or you may want to aggregate those columns, or pivot, unpivot, or Windows function. Those kind of capabilities are in these activities. And then you may have a need to row modification. You may want to filter some data or sort some data, or alter that row. And all these activities are also available in a wrangling data flow. That's what I said, these both data flow actually overlap with each other. And probably with experience, you will know that which data flow you want to prefer for which kind of transformation. So let me move forward and show you how a wrangling data flow screen look like. So this look like this. You have the table here. You can exactly see the data here. And probably this is not very easy to see in the mapping data flow, but because this is more focused on the data, that's why you can see the data. You can write the queries here, create the columns and filter and all those kind of things you can do here. And you can actually write the full-fledged logic here to transform the data, which we'll see when we'll do the map demo of wrangling data flow. All right, so move forward. Now, finally, I want to show you, or I want to tell you what happens behind the scene. Now, before I explain this, let me go back to my data factory interface to show you something. All right, I'm on my data factory screen now. So earlier, before the data flow task was added in data factory, what was the option we had for data transformation? We used to transform data either using the HD inside all these queries, like we can write the Hive query or pick query and all that, or we can also could write the Scala code or Python code into notebook. Basically, we can create a notebook in Databricks, and we can run that notebook from data factory. And we have some more machine learning or some functions and all that, so we can use that also as part of data transformation. But mainly, for example, let's take an example of notebook. So for the complex code, for the complex transformation, we used to create a notebook, and we used to add or run that notebook from data factory. This was the scenario before the data flow. Now I'm back to my slide, and now try to understand what happens after adding the data flow. Now you are working on data factory. You're simply doing the drag and drop and changing the configurations and all. But behind the scene, all the heavy lifting are doing by the data factory. So all your interface transformation which you have selected, all that convert into the JSON file, and then convert into the Scala, and then run that Scala into the notebook, into Databricks, into a cluster. So basically create the cluster, run that code, and return the result back to the data factory. All these things are going on behind the scene. So behind the scene, my point is, behind the scene, still data factory running your code into a Databricks, but you don't have to deal with it. You don't have to create the notebook. You don't have to create the clusters. You don't have to do all this conversion, anything. Everything will be taken care by data factory. All you have to do is just simple drag and drop and just change the configuration, and that's it. Converting code into JSON, then Scala, creating clusters, running that code, return result back. All this heavy lifting are taken care by the data factory. So behind the scene, data flow will execute on Azure Data Factory using Spark clusters, and Azure Data Factory internally handles all the code translation, Spark optimization, and it not just run your code into Databricks, it also figure out what is the best configuration and how it can optimally run your code in Databricks, and finally execute of transformation. So all of these things taken care by the Data Factory. Now I hope that this has given you a good understanding about data flow in terms of concept, and in the next lesson we are going to see the demo of both mapping and wrangling data flow. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back. And in the previous lesson we discussed that there are two types of data flow: mapping data flow and wrangling data flow. Now in this lesson we are going to see demo for mapping data flow. So let me go back to my data factory and explain what are going to be our inputs and output of this demo. Alright, so I'm back to my data factory, and I hope you are following this course in sequence. And in that case, you know that earlier we created this storage account called Azure Blob Storage 108. And in this account, we created a container ADF input. And if you go inside this folder, I have two files here, product and product category, and both files are .csv format. And if I look at the product file here, I have, let me preview this data. So I have a product ID, name of product, color, and other information related to this product. And I also have product category ID column here. I do not have product category name here. So I can see this code here, but I do not know what does it mean. What is the product category? Now for this, I have this separate table here. So if I look at this table, or sorry, this file, product category.csv file, I have product category ID and the name of this category. Now I want to join both of these table or file and come up with the one table final or one final file in which have all the columns from the product table as well as the name from product category.csv file. So let me close this. So basically these two are going to be the input of our demo. We will join these two, and finally we will store our output into ADF output container. So right now it is empty, and here we will store our final output. Now let me go back to my data factory, and earlier we created these two pipeline. So I don't want to touch these, so let me create a new pipeline here. So I will create a new pipeline, and I may give the name here p_mapping data flow. All right. So now in this pipeline, I'm going to use my data flow task. So I will just drag and drop it here, and I do not have any existing data flow, but I want to create a new data flow task. So I will click on new, and in this demo we are going to see the mapping data flow. In the next demo, upcoming demos, we will see a wrangling data flow. So let's look at the mapping data flow here. So I will click on OK. And since this is the first time we are creating this, so it is just showing us this helping pop-up. So I can cross this here. I don't need this as of now. All right, so I'm going to create a source here, but before that I want to show you something that for every source, or in fact every transformation, we have option for data preview here. So if I click here, I can see the data as of now. So for example, if I have 3 transformation, after 3 transformation, how does data look like? I can come here, I can look at data, and I can figure out whether it is looking what I'm looking for. So basically it gives us the interactive snapshot of data. So, but I cannot see anything here, and I will not be able to see anything until I on this data flow debug. So let me on this, and I can have this default integration runtime, which is auto resolve integration runtime. I'm fine with that, and let's click on OK. Now, why did I start this early? Because it will take 5 to 7 minutes to start the data flow debug, and meanwhile we can develop our data flow. Actually, when we start this, on the back hand side, it is going to create a cluster, the set of cluster in Databricks. So it will take some time. So by the time we will finish, we will have a data preview ready. That's why in the very beginning, I wanted to start this. All right, so coming back here, I need to define source here. So let me click here and go to my source setting. I can give the name of my source here. So I can say product, because I'm going to read the product table in this, and you see that the name here changed to product, and it is going to be dataset type, and here we need to define the dataset. So I think we already have dataset here, but still anyway we can create a new dataset here. So I'm looking for the blob storage, so let's continue, and here we are going to choose the type of our input, and we know that this is CSV file, so delimited text we will choose here. Click on continue, and now here we can give the name to this data set. So I can say ds underscore maybe product, because it is representing the product CSV file. And here we need to choose our linked service. So I already have the existing one, but if you want, you can create a new one. It's pretty simple. And if you're following this course, we explain this in detail, how to create a new linked service. So let me cancel this, and let me select the existing linked service is Azure blob storage. And I can click here to choose the file which I'm looking for here for the dataset. So I will go into ADF input folder, and here we have our product file. I will select it and click on OK here. So we have the ADF input container. We do not have any directory. Right inside this folder, we have the product.csv file. And first row, we know that it is, we have header in the first row. So I will check this box here. And the schema we can take from connection. So everything looks good here, and I will go ahead and click on OK here. And this will create a data set for the product CSV file. Now let me add another source here, and this source is going to represent product category. This is not data set, actually this is name of the source, product category, and then we have a data set as a source type, and once again we are going to create a new data set here. So this is the blob storage and .csv file, and the name I would like to give here product category. All right, this is good. And once again, we already have a linked service here, so I will choose the linked service, and I will choose the file here, product category. This is our second input, and we know that the first row is having a header, so I will click here, and let's click on OK. So we have now both of these two sources here, product and product category. Meanwhile, if you notice that our data flow debug has also started, you can see this little green check here. So if I go to the data preview, I've selected the product category here, and if I go to data preview, I can see the data of this file here. Similarly, if I go to product here, I can go to data preview, and I can refresh here, and it will fetch the data maybe in few seconds. But we can move forward meanwhile. So our next goal is to join both of these tables. So on the product, I have this little plus sign here. So let me click here, and I can see all the possible transformations here. On the background, you can see data from product file have been fetched here for us to preview. So we have these transformations here, and I'm going to use the join transformation. So let me click here, and if I go to the join, let me name here join product and product category here. All right, so Now here we need to define the left and the right portion of the join. So in join we have the left stream, and product is going to be our left stream, and you can see that this is joined here. And on the right stream we are going to have the product category, and you can see that it has developed this join with this table here. And what kind of input we want? Join we want. Is it going to be full outer, left join, right join, or inner join? So right now we are fine with the inner join here. Now if we're joining these two tables, here we need to define the joining key. So our joining key, if you remember, is going to be product category ID. So from left stream and from right stream, both I will select the product category ID. Alright, so let's move forward, and I will explain this later, but meanwhile let's go to data preview. So it is fetching data. It may take a few seconds. Meanwhile, okay, the data is here. So we have joined both of these two tables, so we should be able to see data from both table here. So you can see we have parent product category ID, and we should have a product category name here. So here it is. If you see, we have a product category name and product name. So right now we have same column name. We will change this in the time being. So right now we have a source. We have joined these both of these tables. Now let me sync this table, or the final output we want to put into the destination. So in the destination category, select the sync, and I will just cross it here. So let me select the sync here, and I can say product output maybe as the name of this final destination. And in the incoming stream we have job product category, which is fine, and sync type is dataset, which is also fine. And in the dataset, now we need to create a new dataset, and once again I will select the blob storage, because in the same blob storage we are going to save the output. So I will continue, and I want to save my final data in a .csv file. So this is fine, and I will select the continue, and here I can give the final dataset name as a maybe product prod category, and I can choose the same linked service here because we have the same destination. And here I can choose my final output folder name or container name. So I will select the ADF output, and I will click on OK. So this is my final path where I want to save my output, and first row I want to save header. So this is fine, and I will click on continue here. Alright, so we have almost complete our data flow here. We have input from product and product category. We are joining both of these two tables or the files, and finally we are saving this back to the same blob storage. Now if we choose the destination here or the sync here, I have few settings here, and so this looks okay here, and I want to go to the mapping part. This is important here, and right now auto mapping has been already selected. So let me off this here, and I can see the mapping below, which I can change manually if required. So one of the thing here is we do not want to have duplicate columns. So product category ID is also coming from product table, as well as product category ID is coming from product category table. So I don't need the same column twice. This is going to be duplicate. So let me just remove this column here. So I can simply click on remove mapping, and this will delete this folder from here. All right, otherwise this looks good here. And here we have setting the skip duplicate input columns or skip duplicate output columns. Now one thing I can do here, because from product we have a name, and from product category also we have a column called name, and this may create a problem later because we have the same name. So I would say product category name here. So this will change the name of our output. Now I think we have all columns with a different name. So this looks good here. I will go ahead into my inspect part now, Now in inspect, I can see the metadata of these files, of these data. So I can see that in input, I am having these 16 columns from product and from product category. So basically 13 columns from the product file and 3 columns from the product category files. Total 16 columns I have, and all the type of these columns. Now if I click on output here, I can see I have updated one column. If you remember, I changed the name of one column. I have dropped one column here. I dropped the duplicate product category ID column, and the remaining 14 columns are unchanged. So total now we have 15 columns. So in inspect, you can quickly look the metadata you have right now after this transformation. And this column, this property is with all the items here, all the activities here. So if I select the join here, we also have inspect here. So basically, whenever we have this data stream, we can quickly come here and look at the metadata of the current data in the transformation. And finally, I have data preview here, and I can refresh, and it will show me the final data which is going to be output in my blob storage in my output folder. So we have a product ID, product name, and all of these columns. And in the end, we also have product category name. So this is going to be our final output. So just see the beauty here. Even before I put the data into my output folder, I can quickly come here and preview. And if required, I can change my data flow here. If required, I can change the transformation. I can add another transformation or change the existing one. So this is a very handy tool. After every transformation or after every change of data, I can come here and I can look at how my data look like in this current stream, and if there is any change I want to have in this data. And this data does not show all the rows at the same time. It may show a few, maybe hundreds of rows, initial few hundreds of rows. So now everything looks good here. I think we can go back to our pipeline and save the changes and run this pipeline. So let me go back to the pipeline here, which we are making, and this is the data flow we have been working so far. And let me validate here to see if I have everything, whatever required, minimum required configuration if we have done. So it says everything looks good here. So let me publish my changes here, and we have all these changes here. So let me publish these changes, and once our changes published and save into a live server, we are going to run this pipeline, and in the final output folder we should see our data. All right, so publishing has been completed. Let me just close this here, all these little windows, and we have our pipeline mapping data flow pipeline ready. So let me go and trigger this pipeline now, and we do not have any parameter as of now, so I will just click on OK here. And it has already, you see that it has already been triggered, and it may take a few minutes before we complete this pipeline. So meanwhile this complete, I want to show you some more settings which may be helpful for you, and these are some common settings here. So when I select the data flow here, I have all these settings, retry, secure, and I have already explained this in previous lessons, so I don't want to repeat this. So let's go to the next section here, which is the setting, and this is the data flow. And here we can choose our integrated integration runtime, which is by default as a auto resolve integration runtime, which is fine. And now these two settings are important. One is the compute type. So if you drop down here, if you click here, we have 3 different options here. And I'm sure you remember that we discussed that behind the scene, Azure Data Factory is going to create a Spark clusters on Databricks and going to run the code in the Databricks. So basically it will convert this mapping data flow to the JSON file and then the Scala, and that Scala code will run into the clusters of Databricks. And finally we can see the output here. So these 3 represent what kind of cluster type we want, what kind of compute type we want. So we have general purpose option, which we can generally use for development purpose, and we have compute optimized and memory optimized. So in production, you may want to use the memory optimized option so that you can have more data in memory, and you may save yourself from the errors like out of memory exception and those kind of error. Now compute is helpful when you are debugging your code, when you want to quickly look at the data in between while debugging. So in those scenario in production, compute may be helpful, but in production generally we want to choose the memory optimized. But right now general purpose is good enough for me. And here we can choose the how many core count we have. So we can choose either 4, 8, 16 and 32. By default is 4. So if I just choose the run on auto resolve, it will choose the 4 driver code here. And then we also have option for polybase here. So if our destination or if our source is going to be a data warehouse, we can select the polybase option, and this will help us to store the data temporarily in the stage environment. So I'm sure you know about data warehouse. There are many options to ingest data into data warehouse, and the polybase is the most famous one, is the most optimized one. And in this, we want to store data, before storing to data warehouse, we want to store data in the staging area. So we can do those kind of configurations here in polybase section. And we do not have any parameters as of now, but we can create a parameter. And we can pass value at the runtime dynamically. And then we have user properties, which we have already discussed in the previous lesson, and it is going to be same for data flow task also. Now this is all we have for data flow here. Now let me go inside the data flow, and here we may have few more properties. So for example, if I select the destination or sink, we have already discussed about this data preview here, and we have different columns here. And you see we also have this option to see the statistics of a particular column. So for example, if I choose the color here, and let me just close this to have a little bit more space here, and if I go to the right, I can see the stat of the color column, like how many black we have. So 30% of data is having the black as a color for this product. Similarly, I can choose any category. For example, let me choose the product category name here, and if I refresh it here, so it may take a few seconds here, and then basically we can see the stat of product category name here. So let me refresh this here, the data, and again, I don't want to wait here, but the point is if we select any column here, so let me quickly select this here and select the statistics from here, and I should be able to see the statistics of product category name here. So I will come back here. Meanwhile, let it fetch this data. So we already have discussed the inspect section here, settings here. We know the inputs and outputs, and we can look at the changes here. One column updated, one dropped, and total number of columns and the type of column, the input columns, and all those kind of metadata related to data we can see here. Once again, let me close this also to get more space. Now let me go to this optimized section here, and here we have the partition type. So the use current partition is the default one. So this means the partition will be whatever is native in the Spark data flow, whatever is already there in the Spark cluster, settings are there. We will just inherit those settings here. And then we can choose the single partition. That means we do not want any partition, and all the data in the output file we want to save as a single file in the output folder. Or we can choose different partitioning options here, and this is definitely a separate lesson to discuss detail about all of these. Let me just quickly say one line about each partition, just very quickly to give introduction to these partition types. So round robin means when you do not have a good partition key and you want to just distribute your data equally in all the partitions. In hash key, we can choose the column and it will generate the hash key for that column, and all the rows for the same hash key will go into one partition. And then we have the dynamic. In this, you can provide some kind of expression here, and based on that expression or column, the data will divide into different partition. And then we have fixed range. You can provide the range here, for example, from this value to this value, going to particular partition. So for that, you should have a very good understanding of your data. And finally, we have a key partition. That means all the unique values in a particular column will go into one partition. So everything, for example, one color, black color, will go into one partition. And that's why we do not have a number of partitions here, how many partitions we want, because it depends on the number of unique values we have. So anyway, we can discuss this sometime in detail in the upcoming lessons. But we can choose all these partitioning option here. Best would be to just leave it as a default unless you have very good reason to change it and you really know about your data and you know what you are doing there. And then we also have a mapping, which we have already discussed before. And here we can either have the auto mapping, or we can manually change the mapping here. And then we have some more settings here. For example, what should be our final output file name? We can leave it as a default, let system choose it, or we can provide some kind of pattern here. Or for every partition we can have a separate file name, or as we have data in the column, or output as a single file, or we can clear the folder. So those kind of settings we can choose here, and once again we will discuss this in detail later, but I just want to give a quick heads up about these settings here. And of course we have the sync setting here, and we option have, if you want to skip number of lines, allow schema drift. Schema drift means if your metadata of your input columns can change frequently, but you still do not want to stop that data to coming to the data flow. So that we allow here. For example, if your metadata of your column change or your name of your column change, it still allows you to have that data. And of course we have the valid schema option here, which will validate before allow that you have the same schema which you designed here. So we will discuss all these settings in detail. Right now I just wanted to give a quick heads up, and most of these settings are not just in sync but are other transformation also. For example, you can see we have inspect here in the join, and we have the optimized setting here. In the product section we can choose the partition. We have the projection, where you can choose the reformat the data. For example, default is string. If you want, you can reformat to different data type. So this is all we have right now in the data flow. Let me go back to my pipeline here, and let's see if our data flow has been completed. So let me refresh this. Let me refresh this and see what is the status of our pipeline. So it seems like it has completed successfully. Let me go back to my output folder here. So if I go back to my container and go to the output here, and I can see my output here. So if I select this file, this is the final file. You can see the size also 32 KB. And if I view this file, I should have an expected output here. So let me preview here, and I can see all the columns related to the product, as well as we should have a product category name here. Let me download this file and show you from there. So let's click here and download this file and open this file from here. And we have the product category name as well as all the data related to product in this file. So I hope this has give us some insight, some familiarity with the mapping data flow. And of course mapping data flow is a big topic, and it has a lot of transformations and different settings and indices, how to optimize those settings and everything, which we can sometimes look into the future lesson. Thank you very much. And in this demo we are going to look at wrangling data flow, the demo for wrangling data flow. So let me go back to my data factory and explain the inputs and output of this demo. Alright, so now I'm inside my Azure Blob Storage 108, which I created earlier in this series. I hope you are following this series in sequence. And we have one container here, ADF input, and we have two files here. So in this demo, I'm going to read product.csv file, and I will possibly make some changes in rows or maybe in columns. We will decide at that time. And finally, I will save my output into another folder. Let me quickly create this container here, output wrangling data flow. All right, so I will save my output into this container. So let me go back to my data factory and create a new pipeline here, and I may give my pipeline name as pipeline wrangling data flow. All right, so this is good. So earlier was mapping data flow, this is wrangling data flow. And let me close this. And in this demo, once again, I'm going to pick up the data flow task or data flow activity, and I want to create a new data flow. So I will click here, and this time we want to use the wrangling data flow, and you can see this is still in preview. So by the time you see this demo, this may not be in preview, and maybe Azure makes some changes. And I will try to update my demo if there are some significant changes, but just want to give you a heads up that this is still in preview. So let's click on OK here. And here, first we have to define our source and our sink or the destination. Let me quickly give the name here for this data flow. So maybe data flow wrangling demo, something like this. I think this has to be the underscore here. Okay, this is good now. So first we have to define the sources here. So let me create a new data set, or I think we can use our existing data set. If you remember, we created this data set in the previous lessons. So I can use this existing data set here, ds underscore product. And in the destination also, I have a separate container. So let me create a new data set here, and this is going to be a blob storage. And I want to save output as a .csv file. So I will choose the CSV here, and I can give the name here data set and output wrangling data flow, something like this. And I can choose my linked service. I already have this service which we created earlier. And let me choose the folder, and this is going to be our folder, output folder, which we just created, basically the container in more technical terms. And the first row I want to save as a header. So let me click OK. Everything else looks good here. And we have our source, we have our sink, everything looks good. So let's click on OK here. And now our wrangling data flow window will open here. And you can see this is pretty much different than a mapping data flow. In this, we immediately can see our data here right in front of us. So if you see this queries option here, the folder here, the menu here, if you open this under ADF resource, you can see all these sources we have. So right now we have one source. We can have more than one source. So if you go to the settings here, you can see that right now we have defined one source, but you can add more source here. And here below is the current data set what you have, which is going to be the final output of your wrangling data flow. Now let me collapse this to get a little bit more space here. Now you can make changes here, and you can see all those different options here to change, make changes. And behind this option, the Power Query will run to make changes. So if you already know, if you're already good at Power Query, actually you can also click here Advanced Editor, and you can write queries by yourself to make those changes. Or you can just simply, for example, just select this column, right click, and you can remove this column. You can duplicate this column if you want, or you have different options like unpivot, or you can replace the values and all that. So let me just remove this column right now, and this column is removed, and you can see that we have another step added here. So every time you make some change in your data set, you can see new row here, new layer here. So we just removed one column, and if you go back to the source, you can see this column which we removed, and you can come here to remove column. It will show you the new data set. And if I go and make some more changes here, for example, if I go to modify date, and let's say if I rename this column, and let me call product modify date here, and you can see the new layer here, renamed columns, and I can go back to my previous layer, and you can see the previous name. And if you're not happy with some of the transformation, you can just simply delete that transformation. For example, I can cross here, and I can see my column back here which I removed earlier. So let me go ahead and choose both of these columns and remove once again, and I have another layer here for removed column. Similarly, we have more transformations here. You can replace value. You can see here the little icon from 1 to 2. So you can replace those value here. For example, you can select this column, and you can click on replace value from and replace with this value. So you can replace value, you can split the column. If you want, you can remove some of the rows here from top rows or alternate rows or bottom rows. Similarly, you can remove the column, and you can go to the add column option here, and you can add the custom column here. And here you can write the formula to create this new column. So you can take one of these columns and create the formula, maybe some expression, and based on that expression the new column will define. Similarly, you can have the, you can duplicate this column, and you can also have option to view the schema instead of this data set. And here you can see all the columns and the type, and if you want, you can change the type here, or you can remove this column, or rename this column from here itself also. So let me go back to my data view here once again and come back to home. So basically, once again, this is to make changes in your data or the schema, maybe if required. And once you are done, once you're happy with your changes, you can just click on done here, and it will save your data, whatever the changes you have made so far. And let me expand this once again here and go back to my data flow. Hopefully this will complete successfully without any error. And let me go back to my data flow here. So I have my wrangling task here, and I can quickly validate, and hopefully everything should look good here, which is, and I will just publish my changes here very quickly. So I have one pipeline and one data set, and let me publish it here. And once again, as soon as the publish will complete, I hope it is completed by now. And as soon as this complete here, I'm going to go ahead and run this pipeline. And this may take maybe a few seconds or few minutes to complete this wrangling pipeline, wrangling demo pipeline. And this should produce an output in my ADF output wrangling data flow folder right here. So it will take few minutes. Let me stop my recording here, and I will start it as soon as this complete. All right, it seems like my pipeline has completed successfully. So if I go to the notification tab, you can see here, if it is more than 5 minutes long, your pipeline is running more than 5 minutes, you can click here on view run, and it will take you into the monitor section here. So if you expand this, you can see that right now we are inside the monitor section, and you can see that your pipeline has completed successfully. Or you can also click here on all pipeline runs, pipelines here, and maybe you can refresh here. It seems there is some filter applied here. All right, you see that it is copy data wizard filter. I don't want this filter. So you see that my pipeline is here, wrangling data flow, and this is completed successfully. So let me go back to my output folder here, and if inside the container, if I go into ADF output WDF, I can see my output right here. So if I open this file, the output file, I should see all those changes which we made there. So if I click on preview here, you can see that we removed 2 columns and I cannot see those columns, sell date, and there was one more column, and then we renamed this column from modified date to product modified date. So we can see those changes which we made in the wrangling data flow. So that's it for this demo. You see that wrangling data flow is still in preview. So by the time you see this demo, there may be some changes. And if there are any significant changes, then I may re-record this demo. Otherwise, I hope that by now you have a better understanding about wrangling data flow. Thank you. In previous lessons, we discussed about how to create a pipeline, how to design a pipeline. And once we complete our design, obviously we want to run these pipelines in production. And in production, often we run these pipelines periodically, maybe every minute or every hour or every day, depend on whatever our production needs are. So when these pipelines run in production, obviously we want to monitor these pipelines. We want to see how these pipelines are doing, how long they are taking to run these pipelines. If there is any error, how many resources these pipelines are consuming. And in case of error, obviously we want to send an alert to ourselves so that we can take a look before our client know about this, or before that whatever the downstream process may get affected because of this failure. Or sometimes we may send an alert to ourselves if our pipeline is consuming more resources than we expect, so that we can proactively figure out if we need to take some action, around that. So all those things, monitoring and depend on monitoring, depend on what kind of action we want to take based on those monitoring. All those things we do in this monitor section on the left side. So we have, although we have looked at monitor section many times, even when we're designing our pipeline, either during debugging or during run, we want to see if it is completed successfully. But in this lesson, I want to go a little bit in more detail about this monitor section. So it has these 5 sections here: dashboard, pipeline run, trigger run, integrated runtime, and alert and metrics. So let me first go to the dashboard section, and here you can quickly look, have a quick view of your pipeline runs. You can see that how many pipelines have completed successfully. Let me change that time here. So instead of last 3 days, let's say I want to see last 1 week or more than 1 week, so that I can see some failures also. So I have this small portion of failure also. So I can see that 19 fail I have, and 997 succeed. Similarly, we have the activities and we have the triggers. And you can change this graph also. You can see in terms of line. So it depends on how comfortable you can figure out the data. You can change that. And of course, you can change this time zone also. But the point is, these 3 sections ultimately pointing to these different sections on the left side menu. So if I click here, I will go to the pipeline section. Or if I click here, again, I will go to the pipeline section. Inside the pipeline, there's the activity section, so I will go there. Or if I click here, I can go to the trigger section. So let me click here and go to the pipeline section. You see, I'm now in the pipeline section. All right, so here we can have a view based on our pipelines. And once again, I want to change my time range. So this looks good to me. And we can select the time zone here. And do we want to see only the pipeline or all the rerun of the same pipeline also? So I want to include the rerun also of the same pipeline. So if the same pipeline I ran for 5 times, it will show me all that 5 times the instance of the same pipeline, 5 instance of the same pipeline here. And here we have the different view. I'll come back to this in a minute, but before that, let me go to the other options. And here you can filter based on the status of all pipelines. So it looks like everything is green here, but let's say I want to see if there is any failure. So I will click here and select failed, and I can see all the failed pipelines in this time period here. And I can see here, and I can look at the error, that why these pipelines failed here. And here we have the run ID, which is the unique ID assigned to this instance of pipeline. So if I run this pipeline again, I'm going to have the different run ID of the same pipeline. And then of course we have the status here, and we can see that who ran this pipeline. This was manually triggered. This was the total duration of the pipeline, and at this time this pipeline started. And here I have option to rerun this pipeline if required. And here I can see all the resources consumption by this pipeline. I can see that how many activity runs here, and if it is a self-hosted integration runtime, I may see some data here, or what kind of compute it used at the Databricks side. I can see those values here, and based on these value, it looks like there was not much in this pipeline. This is failed, so I cannot see much data here. But the point is, if you have that data and I can fill in the price calculator, I can see that how much this pipeline is going to cost me. So we can look at all these details. So let me look at all status here so that I can show you a few more things here. And here you can see that we have the parameters inside this pipeline. So if I click here, I can see this pipeline has two parameters, input file name and output file name. And if I have tagged a pipeline with some value, I can see those tag here, and I can filter based on these tags also. So for example, I can say the project 1, all pipelines related to project 1. So I can see those tags here assigned to particular pipeline, and I can go here and add the filter for my pipeline. For example, if I click on add filter, and if I want to see the pipeline only copy data pipeline, I can just filter it here, and it will show me all the copy data pipeline. Similarly, I can add filter here, and as I said, we can assign the tag annotation to the pipeline, and if I have any tag here, I can select it, and it will filter only those pipelines assigned to a particular tag. So let me just remove these filters as of now here, and this is good now. Now, what is this Gantt thing here? So let's say I have the same pipeline which is running couple of dozens of time here, and I want to see the duration of this pipeline. Let's say if I want to see that if this particular pipeline, any particular instance of this particular pipeline took a lot more time than a general duration on which this pipeline complete, then what I have to do, I have to go through all this duration and and figure out if there's a time more than this. The easiest way of doing that is to change this to Gantt view, and here immediately I can see this pipeline in a more graphical way, in a more visual way. And here you can see that almost all pipelines run in the similar duration. So if one pipeline, because of network latency or for whatever reason, took much more time, you can immediately see here the bigger green portion or the red portion if it fails. The green bar or the red bar, and you can immediately figure out. So just give a quick snapshot here is much more easier than going into this duration and do the calculation in mind that which duration is greater and which duration is lower. And here, not just, you can see if you just click here, you can see all these details related for this particular pipeline run. You can see the status, time, start time, end time, and here you can see the duration deviation. That is 9%. That means whatever is the average duration for this pipeline. For example, here we can see the longest duration or the shortest duration. So whatever is the average duration, this is deviated from 9% from that duration. So which may be helpful, and from here itself you can, if you want, you can restart this pipeline, or you can click here and go to that particular run of this pipeline. So if we click on the pipeline, we will come into this view. So let me show you this once again to avoid confusion. So for example, let me go back to the list view here, and if I click on this pipeline, I will go inside this pipeline and I can see all the activities. So this is the same view which we got when we ran on that run ID. So now we are inside this pipeline and I can see all the activities here. So I mean, I only have one activity, that's why I can see only one activity here. But if I have, you know, multiple activities, I can see that whole graph here, the whole data flow, you know, all the activities here. And here we can have the list of all those activities, and again I can see the input, what are the inputs of that activity, what are the output of that activity, and here we can see the detail. You see this little glass button here. If you click here, you can see the detail of that activity, you know, what kind of input it was. It was the blob storage, and output was the SQL database, Azure SQL database, and how much data read, you know, in terms of the storage, the space. So 28 KB or 46 KB, how many rows were there? 295 rows were there. And here you can see even the more details, you know, what kind of, you know, at what time it started, how many DIUs this pipeline consumed. So 4 DIU, you know, data integration unit. And how many parallel copies it was running? Only one in this particular case. And was there any pre-copy script? So you can see all those details into this section here. And then you have you know, start time or the runtime of this particular activity. And then of course you have the duration, status, and which integration runtime it used. So it used the default integration runtime here. And here you can see the user property, which we discussed earlier if you're following this course in sequence, but I can explain this again in a minute. And here, if there's any error, I can look at here, and this is the run ID, which is the unique ID assigned to this particular activity. And this is different from pipeline. So if this activity has, let's say, 5 activity, all of those 5 activities will have different runtime here, which will be unique to that particular activity. And of course you have options here to rerun this pipeline or particular activity if you want to rerun. Or let's say if there are 10 activities here, and after 8 activities and the 9th one failed, then you can rerun from that failed activity, so that you don't have to run it from the start. So I hope now this has given us the fair idea about how we can monitor the pipelines here. And similarly, we can go to the trigger section and we can see what are all the triggers ran which we schedule at particular time. So I have this one trigger which I schedule just to show you the data here, and this trigger is assigned with one pipeline. So if there are a number of pipelines, you can see all pipelines. So I only have one pipeline assigned to this trigger. Let me show you this. So let me go to the manage section here, and in that I have this trigger. So I have this one trigger, which is right now I stopped it, but I can run it again if required. And the one pipeline is assigned to this trigger. And if I open this, I have this start time and end time, and I was running this every minute to gather some data to show you in the demo. So let me go back to monitor here, and once again to the trigger section. So we have you know, this trigger, all these triggers, you know, and all these triggers completed successfully. Status is completed, and if you want, we can see the properties of this trigger, that what was the time the trigger ran and what was the actual schedule time. So this may be different sometime, you know, not necessarily start the same time. If the previous pipeline has not completed, and depend on how you design your trigger, it may not be the same time. So you can see all those properties here, and if there's any message or you know, you can edit the columns here. If you want, you can add or remove the columns of all these columns which are showing here. And I think that's it for the trigger section. And of course you have the filter option here. If you want, you can you know, filter for particular trigger here. So this is it. And now let's go to the integration runtime here. And in integration runtime, we can have, as you know, discussed in the previous lessons, we can have 3 types of integration runtime: SSIS, self-hosted, or Azure, which is also default. And I can see all of them here right now. But if you want, you can filter them, you know, as per self-hosted. So I have one, or Azure, or SSIS. I do not have any for SSIS. So let me click on all here to see all the integration runtime. And once again, you can see that this integration runtime, if I click here, I can see all the pipelines which ran under this integration runtime. So I can see, first of all, I can see the, you know, status which is running, type, and the type of integration runtime, which is Azure. and the subtype is public, and the region is auto resolve because this is Azure default integration runtime, which is auto resolved by the data factory. And if I go to the activities, I can see all the activities ran by this integration runtime. And once again, I can see all that detail, the activity name, the type of activity, the duration, and the status. It is failed, and this is the name of pipeline. So we have the pipeline runtime and activity runtime here. And once again, you have the input, output, and errors and detail, all those detail level information if you want to see here. And if I click on particular pipeline, I will once again go to the pipeline section. So right now we are in integration runtime, and if I click here, you see we will go to the pipeline, and again we have the similar view here which was there in the pipeline. So these are the options we have for the pipeline run, trigger, and integration runtime. And finally, we have the alerts and metrics, in which we can look at the metrics, and where we can create the alerts in case of any failure, or there are different matrices which we can choose to create an alert on. And this is we are going to look into the next lesson. Thank you. In this lesson, we want to continue our discussion on Azure Data Factory Monitor. We have already discussed all these sections earlier: dashboard, pipeline run, triggers, integration runtime. Now in this lesson, we want to focus on Azure Data Factory alerts and matrices. And once I go inside this section, I can see two options here. One is for the metrics and one is for the alert. Now if I click on alert here, you can create an alert, but if I click on metrics, it will take you to the another page dedicated for Azure Monitor metrics. But I would say both of these options are more or less shortcut of monitoring section alert and metrics. So if I come to the main page of Data Factory, so this is my Data Factory ADF 108, and in this page we have a section for monitoring, and inside this we have alerts and metrics, and we also have diagnostic settings. So this is basically kind of shortcut for this alert and metrics. So let me explain all these options from here. So if I go to the metrics here, and here we can get the quick view of the performance and health of our Azure Data Factory. So let's start this. So on the left side, we can see the scope. Right now, by default, my Azure Data Factory instance has selected here, which is fine. And then we have the namespace. Namespace means we have all these matrices here, and how you want to divide these matrices into different groups according to their category. You can see those namespace here. So basically you can say that this is kind of categories here. So right now I only have one, so I will select it, and here we have all the matrices, and you can see that we have matrices like whenever how many times the activity failed or the pipeline failed, or we have the integration run memory issues, CPI utilization. So we can see all those matrices for our Data Factory right here. So for example, let me see that let me select this failed activity runtimes, and if I select this, I have to select the aggregation function, and I may say, let's say the count. I want to see the count of my failed activity, and I can select the time frame here. So not last 24, but I want to see that last 7 days, let's say. And if I select this, I can see here total 8 my pipeline failed, my activity failed on 10th of June. So you can have a quick look here, the quick view here of all the failed activities you have in your pipeline. And then you can have the different filters here. You can filter based on particular activity type or the failure type, or for particular pipeline, in case you want to choose that, I want to see only this pipeline, how many times the copy data pipeline failed. So you can filter accordingly, or you can split your graph into different dimensions. So for example, if I split based on the pipeline, then all my different pipelines I can see with the different lines here. So for example, I have two pipelines here. We have copy data and we have copy data wizard, let's say. And both of these pipeline, I can see the separate lines. Red one is for copy data and blue one is for copy data wizard. So basically I can split the graph into different lines based on whatever dimension I choose here. And so let's cross this also so that we can see everything once here. And then obviously you have a different type of graph you can choose here. You can drill into the logs. This is a shortcut for activity logs here. And then you can create an alert, which we are going to discuss in a minute. And then you can attach this graph to your dashboard. And of course you have an option here to create another matrix. So you can create as many matrices as you want here. So you're not limited to only one matrix here. So basically the point is, this is the easy and quick view of your overall performance and health of your data factory. And you can look at different matrices and have a quick view what's going on with your data factory. And then we have alerts here. So alerts can proactively notify you of critical conditions of your resources. In our case, it is Azure Data Factory. So we can define an alert here by click on new alert rule. Like if my particular activity failed consecutively for 4 times, let's say, please send me an email. Or if my resources, my CPU consumptions are more than 80% of the threshold, then immediately send me an SMS. Or you can also define the corrective actions based on these thresholds. For example, you can define to run particular function or particular logic if particular condition met, which you define here. So we can click on, for example, the new alert rule here. And here, first you have to select the scope. Now here, which service, which resource you are talking about. So right now we are inside the Azure Data Factory. So by default, it has chosen the Azure Data Factory, although you have option to change the resource here if you want. And then what is the condition we want? So select on the condition, and we have all these different signals. And once again, we have option like failed activity run matrix. So we can, signal type is the matrix. And what are the different signals we can select here? So if my activity fail, or if my trigger fail, or let's say if I have the CPU utilization threshold. So basically you select different signals here. So let me choose, for example, let's say if my activity fail, run matrix here. And here it will show you a quick graph of what happened in last 6 hours, or let's say the 3 days, or maybe a week, so that you can look at what's going on. And based on this, if you want to create your alert. And here, if we go below, we can also see the dimension here. For example, I'm looking for a particular activity type here, or I'm looking for a particular failure type here, or if I'm looking for all the activities. So I don't want to filter it here because I'm looking for all the activities. Now here you have option to define the threshold. And you have two options. One is static and one is dynamic. Static means you are defining. So let's first talk about static. It means that you're defining whenever it is greater than or equal to total, or maybe I would say the count is 10. So if my activity failed greater than or equal to 10 times, then I will get an alert. Now, 10 times in what context? So that we will define here, that we will check in every, let's say 15 minutes. So in the last 15 minutes, if the count is greater than 10, then I will get an alert. And here we have the frequency. That means how many times it will evaluate the failure. So I may say maybe every 5 minutes. So it will go, my basically alert system will go and check in every 5 minutes that how many times my activity failed, and then it will take the data of 15 minutes, and then it will count, and if it is greater than 10, it will send me an alert. And instead of count, you can also take an average or minimum or maximum or total, whatever the aggregate function you want here. Or the other option we have is the dynamic. Dynamic means you will not define the threshold, but Azure Data Factory, using their machine learning algorithm, by itself will define the threshold. And you can just choose the sensitivity here. So for example, let's say my activity failed 5 times here. So based on that, if I say my threshold sensitivity is very high, that means even if it is failed more than 3.7 times, I will get an alert. You know, you see this blue line here, this blue area. This is the high sensitivity area. And then if I select the medium here, you see here my sensitivity is now a little lower. If my activity fail more than 5.7 times on an average, then I will get an alert. Or similarly, I can choose the low sensitivity here. So basically you define here the condition, on what condition you want to get an alert. So after condition, next thing is to define the group name. So group name, action group, basically is the set of actions you want to take if this condition met. And if you create an action group, actually I've already explained this in our Azure Monitor section, so I won't go into detail once again. But the point here is we will define what kind of action we want to take if that particular condition met. Do we want to send an email, or do we want to send an SMS, or we want to create a ticket on IT service management team? And in that case, you can actually also track your ticket later, even after issue resolved, to find out root cause or those kind of scenarios. Or you can also run particular function or logic if particular threshold failed. So sometimes that if this error comes, we want to take this action, we want to run this particular query. So you can define that also, so you don't have to get up in the middle of night if that particular threshold failed. So you can define those actions here. I won't do it once. I won't do it once again because I've already defined it earlier. Now, after you define the action group, you can simply give the name of the rule here, description, and the severity of your alert. And finally, you can create an alert here. This is very easy. You can try it. And once you create an alert, you can go into manage alert rules, and then you can manage those alerts there also. And the last section we have is the diagnostic settings. So in diagnostic settings, basically we store the logs, the metrics logs, into a particular location so that we can analyze them later. So if I click on add diagnostic setting here, I can see all the logs here which is generated by the system, all the logs related to pipeline run or activity run, or maybe SSIS package event messages, trigger runs. So all these are different logs, and maybe I can select all of them. I mean, you don't have to, but if you want, you can select all of them. And then you have the metrics, and you can select all the metrics. So all the logs and all the metrics you can send into these 3 possible destinations. And later you can go and analyze these logs at the later time and maybe get some kind of insight from these logs. Maybe you can see how we can optimize our resources, or how we can prevent a particular error which is getting, and how we can proactively take an action before we get an error. So we have 3 options. You can send into log analytics, and in log analytics, that this is a separate service from Azure, where we can get the log from all different resources into one centralized location. And then Azure has a particular language to dig into these logs and analyze these logs. So we can send into log analytics, or we can send into some kind of storage account, and we have the retention also, that for how many days we want to retain the logs for particular category. And we can use this storage account maybe to retain these logs for some longer period, and later if you want to dig into this and analyze something. And we can also send our logs into Event Hub, and maybe it is used by some third-party tool, or maybe the Power BI, or maybe you want to project that in some kind of report or something. But there's an option to send these logs the stream of these logs into Event Hub. So basically, idea of diagnostic setting is to collect all the logs from the log category or from the metrics category, collect everything and send into these storage for further analysis. So I will discard this, and if we go back, so these are the three main options we have in the monitoring section for Azure Data Factory. Thank you very much.